Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammie Belton. I am the Vice President of People and Culture for Cleveland Institute of Music, and I'd like to welcome you all to our session, Signaling Forward, Association of Allied Doers. Our panelists today are Susan Fetter. She is the um, Program Officer of Arts and Culture for the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. We also have with us Doris Parent, who's the Vice President of Ideas and Strategic Partnerships for the Cleveland Philadelphia Orchestra, and Alan Valentine, President and CEO of the Nashville Symphony. Our session today is going to discuss how we move forward. We had a lot of things, 2020, 2021 had a lot of things going on in this area. We had a lot of statements being issued. Many companies sprung into action and assembled task force and had meetings on how we tackle this issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now we need to move that into action. And our three panelists today have done a lot of that work and continue to do a lot of that and want to pick their brains about how we do that as allies as well as organizations who are responsible for doing it. Also, I want to remind everyone to please ask questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our session today, towards the end of the session today. So please navigate to the Q&A button under the Ballroom tab located on the right side of your screen. So let's get started. Our first question, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to really explain in their mind what an ally is and what their role is when it comes to DE&I. I'll start with Doris.
Sure. Thank you, Tammie. So, how I would define an ally is really a person or an institution that, is able to recognize its privilege in society and use that voice to help shine a light on injustices to help raise awareness, really start conversations and really help to create some change. I don't really think an ally doesn't necessarily have to completely identify with a particular group's experience, but an ally will stand with this group and advocate for this group publicly and privately.
Thank you. Susan, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Tammie, and it's an honor to be here with my colleagues and the virtual room. I've been struggling with this word since the panel was started, and I just want to share some of my struggles with the larger group. I think that insofar as an ally is uniting around to promote a common interest, everyone at SphinxConnect, is an ally. But I'm not sure it's enough simply to declare allyship, and I think that allyship has to be earned. And insofar as allyship is also, Sphinx mission is so positive, transforming lives through the power of diversity in the arts. But there's also, more recently and more accurately, uniting against discrimination, unjust treatment, systemic racism that involves allies stepping forward. I'm not also completely sure. My colleagues are both from predominantly white institutions. Mellon Foundation historically been a predominantly white institution, though no longer is. But are the allies we are talking about BIPOC organizations that are in this space and have been doing the work all the time in allyship? Is it the BIPOC organizations uniting with the PWI institutions? What are the power dynamics? What are the power balances? And I think about that particularly as a funder.
That's really interesting, Susan. I think you're right on point. We try to put people in a box when it comes to allyship, and I think there are so many ways that we can help one another and not necessarily have to be put in that specific box.
Yeah.
In order to do this work and be successful in that space. Alan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would first of all agree with much of what's already been said by Susan and Doris. I think for us, when I think about, an ally, I think about, the fact that I think, first of all, at least from our perspective, we've decided, we really have to approach this work with a great deal of humility as a predominantly white institution, right? I mean, it's a question really of seeking to understand what we don't understand and really trying to bring people into alignment and to develop some common understanding, some common tools to even begin to advance the work. And we've been, in this since before the pandemic started. But it's a long journey, and we've made, I would say a little bit of progress, but we know it's going to be a long journey, and we're excited about it. But it can at times be messy and awkward, this work, and so I think, what I might add to all of that is that I think while we have to approach this with a great deal of humility, we also have to do it with some conviction, and we have to be willing to stay the course, and to really attract people to this work, as opposed to we need to bring everybody in the institution into alignment, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we've been doing that work, and I think the more I learn, the less I know. It's kind of one of those things. But I will say that we are deeply invested in the work here in Nashville, and we're really, I think, optimistic about the future.
Great, thank you. I think you pointed out something really important there, is that we all know that we have a long way to go in this area. There's not a big ending date to this. This is something that has to continue to go and go on and grow. And that's kind of where I'd like to go next. How do we move from the task force, the committees, the policies into actual action? And then continuing, as you mentioned, Alan, bringing others along in this space. How do you do that? What types of mistakes and missteps have you made along the way? And how did you recover from that and move forward? Alan, since you kind of brought that up, I'd like to start with you.
Okay, well, I think first of all, I would say that for us in Nashville, we've really tried to approach the work much in the same way we've approached almost anything we've ever done, which is through, strategic planning and creating visioning exercises. I will say that we developed a strategic plan that has equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging work as one of its central focus points. We talk about it in terms of transforming the institution into one that is more reflective of the community we serve. And we created a written equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging plan. And so that I just say that because I think it's really important to be very intentional about this work. And we have been through the training. We've done a lot of training work with all of the constituents inside our institution. We have been very intentional in terms of our governance committee. I will tell you that, in the case of the Mellon Foundation, of course, Susan mentioned that the institution has really changed in terms of its leadership, and we've sought to do the same thing here in Nashville. And so starting, sort of at every level of the institution, but really focusing on the top of the institution. And I can tell you that just a little bit of progress we've made so far is that, we have currently 20% of our board are people of color, and we have our board chair and 40% of our board officers are currently people of color. So including the board chair. So we've made changes, and that has helped us, every step of the way learn even more. And but one thing I know is that you have to be very intentional. And what I will tell you about the board transformation is that it started with our board chair at the time we started this effort was Mark Peacock, and he went to the conference in Baltimore, the league conference, and he heard a line that stuck with him. And the line was, it's when do you stop looking for your car keys? When you find them, right? And he came back with real fire in the belly about this work. And he said, we're going to do this, and we're going to transform this institution. And here's where we're going to start. And of course, I was completely supportive of all of that. And we have, it's been a journey, but it's really changed the way we think about things. And what I actually believe is that we have to get to a place where this becomes part of our DNA. I mean, it really is something that needs to, we need an anti-racist lens, an equity, diversity, inclusion lens about everything we do in this institution. And we really, if we're ever going to achieve long-term success, I think that's what's got to happen. So I don't want to talk much more than that right now because I know we've got limited time.
Thank you very much. Doris, I'd like to turn to you in this same area. Part of your role is ideas. Can you talk to me about, or talk to us, I should say, about what ideas means,
Right.
and how you mentioned during our pre-conversation how that has really changed your organization. I kind of want to get an idea of what that is, what you've done, and kind of in the same vein, how did you move forward in your organization?
Sure. So first off, ideas for us stands for is inclusion, diversity, equity, and access strategies. And so we launched ideas in 2019, but we really had started this work a little bit before 2019. And the orchestra really went through a true cultural transformation, like very much what Alan was talking about. And it really was grounded in our mission and our values. And what really emerged for us were, with these core values, they really are shaping our behavior as an institution of being authentic, inclusive, and diverse, innovative, exceptional, and being really a convener. And so we've fully integrated ideas into all aspects of our work. So it's really not additive for us. I think someone had mentioned having it be part of your DNA. And from the very onset, that is what we want to strive for. That was our goal, is that we wanted this to be part of our DNA. We want ideas to really be central to our core and really looking at all of our work through an ideas lens. We're really fortunate to have a music director, Yannick Nézet-Séguin, who's really, really championing ideas for us on the stage, off the stage. Our musicians of the orchestra have formed diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, who are really partnering with our other musician committees to ensure that ideas remains as an important element in our work. It's really, it's changed our organization so much that it's really, our current season is really reflective and manifestation of ideas, which we call Forward. And Forward was really informed by several things: the impact of the pandemic, the social justice movement in America, as well as really a drive towards equity and inclusion in a world of orchestral music. In every program we present, a composer, a guest artist, a vision of the repertoire, that it really exemplifies our organizational commitment towards ideas. And one of the inspiring things for us, and one of the inspiring parts for this process for us, is really rethinking how we share the orchestral canon and how we can continue to find innovative ways to do that. There's really been, I would say there's been an inflection point for us here at the Philadelphia Orchestra. We have our music director, Yannick, talking about our commitment from the stage. It's being reflective in our programming. And what we're really seeing is a change in our culture. And we're really seeing things, we're just seeing things really change and rapidly changing for us. I'm not saying that we're done, because if we say that we're done, then I would actually have to kind of raise my eyebrow, because we can never be done. But one of the things that we've noticed, for example, when I was talking about repertoire, we recently were nominated for a Grammy, and it was for a recording of Florence Price symphonies, numbers 1 and 3. And it's just really an exciting moment because, it celebrates Florence Price's achievements and really surmounting, systematic barriers in classical music. And she deserves this recognition and so much more. And we are really proud to be able to be a part of that.
Thank you, and congratulations on the recent nomination. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Susan, at the Mellon Foundation, you all have served on both sides of the spectrum, being an ally and a PWI organization. So can you talk to us about your role in helping organizations move past the forming of ideas and putting things into action, and what the expectations are of the Mellon Foundation that works with these organizations?
Yeah, thank you, Tammie. Great question. I think the answer is it depends. Sometimes ideas come to us. I have been at Mellon for 15 years, and we made our first grant to the Sphinx organization my first year at Mellon. And I can't overemphasize how much I have learned from Aaron and Alpha over the years. And, Aaron's call to action on the stage of Carnegie Hall to try to change the makeup of musicians in the orchestra. I would say similarly, the League of American Orchestras and Opera America have been fantastic partners in the music sphere in helping to educate us and bring us along. Mellon itself underwent a strategic plan shortly after our first Black president, Earl Lewis, joined the foundation. And we articulated at that time the value of diversity. And I say diversity only because I think we were a little slow to come to diversity and inclusion, and then diversity and inclusion and equity. And now under our phenomenal president, Elizabeth Alexander, not only our first woman president, but our second Black president, we have espoused social justice as core to our mission. So I think we had an obligation and responsibility to walk the walk as opposed to talking the talk. When I arrived at Mellon, the only program officer of color was the diversity officer overseeing our higher education Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship program, which has changed the professoriate. I am now one of 2 program officers who are Caucasian. Our board is majority BIPOC, and so is our staff, top to bottom. So once those internal conversations change, as they have by virtue of who's in the room, I think we look outwards. And to your question, how do we help people turn into action? We can't force that. We can catalyze it. We can midwife it. But the first thing starts with our listening. And one of the first people I listened to is actually Valentine, who came to the Accelerando program. It was so well thought out. It was so collaborative. It was so clearly permeating the institution that we funded that. That was a precursor to the work we've done in what we call the Pathways Initiative. And again, that started with a pre-existing collaboration, the Philadelphia Music Alliance for Youth, headed at the Settlement Music School. Philadelphia Orchestra is a part of that, proudly and gratefully. And we saw that successful model, and then we suggested it in other urban centers, are now operating in Boston, Chicago, and the Baltimore, Washington area. And in each of those cases, the equivalent of PMA didn't quite exist. It was somewhat formulated a little inchoate at Chicago. It didn't exist in Boston. So helping move from talk to action involved a planning period for like-minded collaborators, allies to come together in their communities and help co-design with the guidance of Settlement Music School. Mellon has the power to convene. And the National Alliance for Audition Support, which is a Sphinx initiative, was born in a 2015 convening that we had with the League of American Orchestras, another one of our allies. And this was designed. It was calculated as low-hanging fruit. Well, let's have money put toward helping young professional artists from underrepresented communities with audition funding. Well, as I've talked about in other SphinxConnect, it took 3 years to put this together, and it involved allyship between Sphinx and the League and New World Symphony and an advisory council of professional orchestral musicians. And it's hard to say whether they were allies so much as mentors. They were willing to speak truth to power. I'm forever grateful to them for doing so. And we have learned a lot in that process. When we made that initial grant, we were thinking about auditions. We weren't thinking about pandemics. We certainly weren't thinking about changing the collective bargaining agreements around auditions and tenure, but this has emerged from the brilliance of the partners and their wonderful unintended consequences of programs like that.
Great, thank you. I know one of the things I know for us here at Cleveland Institute of Music, changing the future of classical music is our vision. And so part of changing our audience, those who are involved and want to hear classical music and those who haven't engaged in that area, but we want to bring along, one of the things we have to do is change the stage. And so I'd like to hear from all of you how you've worked towards that. And what are some of the ways that our organizations out here in our audience today can help in that effort?
Well, well, if you'd like for me to jump in, since I'm, I think that first of all, I'd start by saying that we actually did incorporate in our new CBA, which was ratified last summer for the post-pandemic period. Not quite every single one, but almost all of the new guidelines or recommendations that came out of NAS. And we implemented those. I will say that it's a little bit, we incorporated those, I'll say. It's been a little bit challenging as we now are just beginning to start having auditions to really bring everybody into alignment, because it's all new and people are trying to sort of get their feet on the ground about it. But we're getting there, and it's all going to be fine. COVID, while it interrupted a lot of things, in our case, we sort of viewed it as an interesting period, because it also, as a consequence, created some opportunities in our institutions. I think we're probably not alone, that a number of us lost musicians to the Great Resignation. And I know that we're not alone, because I've seen it in other places. And that's what might be expected. We weren't immune from that. And that means that we have opportunities to do things a little differently as we rebuild our institutions. And it's both on the staff side and in the orchestra. And so we've also used the pause to great effect to really try to help advance the training work and the institutional alignment work. And that's been helpful. I mean, I will say that without going into any of it, that we have made our share of mistakes along the way. And you mentioned that earlier. And I will say that I think that the learning opportunities that those create, when I said, you have to approach this work with humility, I wasn't kidding. And I know that really firsthand from my own experiences, but we have achieved some success and found our way through those things. And I think, frankly, it's increased the level of understanding in our institution, and that's very helpful. I love what Doris had to say too about really reflecting our efforts in everything we do. And that album, by the way, is a great album. That's a great record. And we're competing with you, I think, actually, in this year's Grammys, but that's okay. That's a great project that happened in Philadelphia. But I will just say that it's been an interesting experience for us, and I think we have to be intentional. And I think over time, we're going to see the results of the work that the National Alliance for Audition Support did to help us rethink how we do auditions and how we handle the tenure process. It's good. I tend to be impatient about a lot of things, but I know that I have to be, this has taught me patience. I know that I have to be very patient, and over enough time, I think we'll get this right, and we'll see real change happen. But by the same token, when I say I'm impatient, I also believe that this work, we've been talking about this work for a very long time, right? I could look outside my door and see Peter Pastryk's picture hanging on a wall in a Rogues Gallery, and think about how in the 60s, Peter made the Nashville Symphony the first integrated orchestra in the South, but it didn't stick, and I think now we have an opportunity to create lasting change. And so I'm excited about that.
That's great. Thank you. Doris, what about you?
So for us, I think, Alan touched a lot on, a lot of our experiences kind of mirror some of what Alan was talking about. But I do think that during the pandemic, yes, it was a pause, but it also created so much more opportunities and really allowing for a lot of participation. And for that, I'm thinking of, our relationship and our partnership with the Sphinx organization, in particular with SOPA, that we were able to have all of our principal players actually participate because we were in the pandemic and we were able to do it remotely and virtually instead of having everyone come to Detroit. And we have really been looking at, as Susan had mentioned, that we are part of PMA, and we've been an engaged partner with this for a very long time, as well as looking at, really tapping into a lot of the young resources here in Philadelphia. We are the lead artistic partner for the All City Orchestra here in Philadelphia. And our musicians put in a lot of time with many of these aspiring musicians and with private lessons, being able to interact with musicians, being able to come to concerts, being able just to really get that one-on-one attention that they really are looking for, to be able to get to the stage and be able to perform on the stage in Verizon Hall. I think that for us, it's really been, it's been intentional. It's been intentional. And we've been really trying to take the time to really look at, what are we putting on the stage? What is being reflected? What are we playing? How is it being reflected in our repertoire for auditions? It's translating there as well. There's just so many different things that, we are being intentional in trying to do and moving that needle. It's a slow process, but I definitely feel that we're moving forward. And it's just been such a wonderful to be a part of the process, to be able to see this, and for us to be able to have the space and feel comfortable talking about things that may not necessarily have been comfortable to speak about before.
That's great. Susan, what are your thoughts in this area? How do we move from the action that we've taken to making that seen on our stages?
Tammie, it's hard to be patient. I agree with Alan on this, but it's somewhat necessary. For us at Mellon, we helped the League Commission do research in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, about fellowship programs at orchestras. And what we learned in that process was that the fellowships had affected the careers of the individuals participating, but had not changed the culture of orchestras. And that if funding dried up, that the work dried up. We also learned that having a single fellow put that person in a fairly untenable position of having to represent his or her race, having to be the representative to the board and the community, and could be very lonely in that environment. So we made several changes as a result of that. One of which was to only fund fellowships when there were multiple fellowships at a single institution. And Cincinnati Symphony, in collaboration with the College Conservatory of Music, was a real exemplar in this, where they wanted to have 5 fellows a year. We have a similar program at LACO, Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. But we also realized that it was incumbent on having a sufficiently large pipeline of qualified, talented musicians. And the issue is not talent, but access to resources. And we realized that that the training for those musicians had to start earlier than Mellon was traditionally funding. So the PMA experiment was a true experiment for us. It's the only pre-college work we are doing, and we are deliberately not calling it K-12 educational programming. We're calling it training of pre-professional musicians, and I call them the Olympic athletes. They self-identify, they know they want these careers. So having more young people qualified to act competitively in audition situations to get into colleges. Silver lining of the dual pandemics of the couple of years that I think our colleges and conservatories are very eager to recruit musicians of color in ways that they might not have been historically. So if this pipeline is feeding into it, virtually every young artist that has gone through our Pathways programs has had multiple offers at colleges and conservatories with money. So the system is working, and that's wonderful. And then NAS came part of that continuum of training between being a young student, and it was also realizing that the community music schools of our country know these students more and have a more diverse population demographic than even the youth orchestras at the high school level. You've already lost to attrition musicians at that. So what could we do to stay into high school and then convince their parents that these are careers that are worth having? The Great Resignation that Alan describes is an opportunity for placement in orchestras. So are our substitute musicians, and I think that encouraging players committees to look more widely at substitutes is giving very needed professional experience to talented musicians. So it's a process that takes years. But I do think the timing is right. I think the openings, orchestras operate on the tenure system by and large, so openings can be rare, especially in winds and brass, but this happens to be a good moment. I'm encouraged by seeing numbers beginning to turn around.
That's great.
I think comment.
Yes, please go ahead.
You just said about the Pathways programs, with Cello Rondo here in Nashville. I just wanted to add that in addition to preparing young people for admission to college, and we've had a lot of success with where they've gone. We've even brought alumni back to play as soloists on our classical subscription series. But one of the things that we didn't expect that's been just this real plus from having done this program is it's building culture inside our institution. Because our musicians are engaged with the program and our staff, and it's really it's helping form culture in our institution, help shape it. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to add that comment.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Just listening to each of you speak on this topic, 3 things come to mind. It's that patience is truly a virtue in this area of work, that change rarely happens quickly. And third is that we have to keep our eye on the prize, and for lack of a better word, we have to continue to look forward and celebrate the small things that we've achieved in this area. And I think that helps us keep going and see the satisfaction in the work that we're doing. I know that I am very proud of many of the students here at Cleveland Institute of Music. They've taken charge of a lot of the things that we do here in this space by using their own voices, which I think is great, and wanting and bringing ideas to the table, which I think is great. We formed a committee last year with 2 of our student groups, and just working with them, hearing their ideas on how we can make this change. I think young people will have a huge, huge impact in continuing to move this work forward. And it's very exciting to see the work, but we have to, as you all have said, we have to remain vigilant and we have to remain patient as we continue the work, because it's not going to change overnight, and it's not going to be, okay, we've done our part. And so with that point, the last question I will have before we turn it over to question and answer is, how do we avoid or do our best to avoid that level of apathy, because change isn't happening quickly, and checking the box to say that, we've done our part, and, we've put some effort here, and I think that's a good enough job. Doris, I'd like to start with you.
Thanks, Tammie. I would say, it's really about, yes, I mean, you talked about it just a few moments ago about really applauding the small achievements. But, at the same time, it's not about applauding the small achievements and like, okay, so we're done and we've checked the box. But really, it's about really continuously building on that culture. And that means that we constantly have to be talking about this. It constantly has to be in the forefront of everything that we're doing. And it can't just be, we talk about it when it's necessary because we do want to, oh, wait, we haven't hit this particular quota that we said that we needed. And that's when we actually surface the discussion again. But it has to be constant, and it has to be shaped and socialized throughout all of our stakeholders within our organization, and as well as our communities that we're in. And really, it's really important for us to continuously look at what is in the plan, and how are we measuring up against that. Do we need to evaluate? We need to evaluate and make sure, like, okay, this is not really working. This is not happening. What do we need to do to make those changes? And how do we make those changes that's going to make them the most impact?
Great. Susan.
Apathy. Can you repeat the question again, Tammie?
Yeah. How do we do our best to avoid apathy in doing this work, because change doesn't happen very quickly? And how do we, because of that, how do we avoid, the box checking and saying that we've done enough in the work, in the space?
Okay, well, I think that implies that doing DEI is some kind of verb rather than being DEI in the case of DNA, and I think that's the first thing to say. I'm in a very fortunate position as a funder that if I don't see the authenticity in the work, I don't have to fund it, or in fact, I won't fund it. I think the patience is a hard one. When we started the Pathways work, even with Project Accelerando, we were adamant that we would support high school students. And every one of the Pathways people said, no, it's way too late to start. You should start in elementary school, and maybe we'll meet you in middle school. Because this was out of scope for Mellon, we had to compromise. And it was also part of the impatience. But I said I needed to show results quickly that even the students starting in high school would be able to progress, and that has been the case. So that's my impatience, my board's impatience, but also that that the listening, as I say, authentically. Going back to ally again, we've been talking about allies. Ally is also a suffix, and when you think about being empathetic, listening empathetically, sympathetically, authentically, critically, that those are all ally components that go into how we design our work at Mellon. Staying the course and being rigorous and being in the room, being present. I've at SphinxConnect, we bring all the Pathways group there. They meet on their own, but my role as funder to understand what's working, what's not working, where course corrections need to be, admit where you've gone astray. As I say with the Alliance, NAS, I was told that really having this money would not be sufficient if we didn't change the culture of orchestras. And so that became another grant to the League of American Orchestras to establish the Catalyst Fund for orchestras that self-selected, and were chosen competitively to actually do the work and to get help with consultancies and help with reframing. But again, looking for that institutional alliance. Alan is nodding his head. I could be talking to an executive director that's really, aligned with this, and he or she may have their senior staff aligned. But if the board is not aligned, or if the musicians are not aligned, it's, my due diligence is understanding the wholeness of the institution to try to make sure that these programs have the best chance for success. And and if there are going to be up bumps anywhere.
Well, we have a lot of great questions in our Q&A, so I'm going to jump to that real quick so that we can get as many of these answered before the end of our session. So, Alan, I will point the first question to you since we didn't get to you on that last question that I had. How can we use music towards restorative justice without patrons assuming it is something political, but rather fundamentally human and necessary for the community?
That's a really, really timely and interesting question because, the political landscape, as we all know, was really divisive before we got into the pandemic, and it's only gotten worse since the pandemic started. And, for whatever it's worth, I will tell you that we have actually begun to see evidence that the political divide is impacting our institution in COVID protocols. I can talk about other things, right? Other ways. And I have been very public about our intentions when I've spoken from the stage, for example, and where we are in this work. And it's one thing to make those statements, and I always feel a little bit awkward doing it, but I have also begun to see comments. Now they're not really aggressive, but I've begun to see comments from people who are patrons of ours, about that work. And so there are people in different places, but I think, when I talked earlier about, you've got to kind of have the courage to persevere in the face of that. And one of the ways our board chair and I discuss that is where, we talk about those things when we hear them and when they happen. And we're convinced that if we stay the course, that we're going to find donors to replace those donors, and that we're going to be, in the long run, the institution is going to be better off. And it may be scary in the short term, but in the long term, I think, if we persevere and we achieve even a modicum of success at this work, we're going to have a vastly larger audience, and the community is going to be much more deeply engaged and invested in our institution. And that's really hard to do in the face, though, of all of that, to make those kind of decisions. And I do think music, can be used to great end in terms of restorative justice. Music is the universal language. It's the thing that binds us together as humans, right? It has great power to express that for which there's simply no words, right? And I think if we really keep our eye on that, the focus is on the music, and we work in every other aspect, it becomes part of our DNA to advance that. We're going to be speaking to a much wider audience, and those other folks that are, not aligned are going to be left behind. And I really deeply believe that. There are days when I wake up, though, and I read my email, or and I'm just not so sure. But I really believe that. So.
Thank you. Susan, I wanted to point this next question to you because you touched on it a little bit previously. So, how do you ensure the burden of change does not fall to new and often historically underrepresented members of an organization?
Thanks, Tammie. I think that is a challenge. I want to rephrase it a little bit, because really what I was thinking about was not so much WI organization, but organization that has been doing this work forever and haven't been recognized. And that even as they begin to enter into allyships with PWI organizations, are often taken advantage of or poached. And I think this is the case for staff and board members. And I think there's an obligation of PWIs to be generous in their thinking about the implications of what they're doing as they're becoming more diverse themselves. The often historically underrepresented members of organizations and orchestras have historically been in education departments, and I think we're seeing them spread into other aspects of organization. There's certainly BIPOC leaders. I'm seeing this probably more in theater than I am in orchestras, but what does it mean to hire a BIPOC leader? What are the obligations of the boards that hire them to ensure their success? To capitalize them sufficiently to realize the expansive and imaginative visions they are bringing to the organization as change agents. But not to be looked at, when getting back to the specific question about members of the organization who are not in leadership, that they not be put upon to be the ambassadors for their races in their communications internally and externally. So I think this is part of why every organization should undergo DEI training, for unconscious biases and for microaggressions, as well as information. And that's just the place for the Caucasian members of the organization to be allies with their BIPOC colleagues.
Thank you.
Tammie, could I answer that question as well?
Sure.
So, as a Black woman in the position of a senior leadership position within the orchestra, when I accepted the position, I've been with the Philadelphia Orchestra since 2011, and so when I accepted this position, I did make it very clear that this cannot be just the work of Doris, the work of the VP of Ideas, that it has to be a collective responsibility for the entire organization. And that, I can help to create change, but I can't make all this change. I can't have that burden be just because I am a person of color to be able to help push that change. And I think it's just very important just to really recognize that and to be able to make sure that your organization sees it as a collective responsibility. And it goes back to ingraining this within your organization, and that becomes part of your DNA.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that as a woman of color myself. So how can we support or encourage DEI work that is authentic and not prescriptive? I think that kind of goes back to some of the things that we talked about earlier. For organizations that are working towards increasing and advancing DEI, but may not have DEI as their central mission or focus. I think for me, it has to be part of your central mission and focus to be authentic about it. That will be my 2 cents. But Doris, why don't you chime in there?
Sure. So I would say for the Philadelphia Orchestra, it's interesting because, we say the terms DEI, but, that's not actually the terms that we use in our organization. We tend to use ideas a lot more. We do use DEI, but you're not going to necessarily hear us say what are the DEI activities and strategies that are activating within this program. We see it more as how is it that we can have an impact in our community, because in Philadelphia, it's 44% African-American right in the city. And we really want to be intentional in how it is that we can help. And especially now within the pandemic, being able to really be that leverage point that can actually help and partner with some of our other organizations that may not necessarily be music organizations, but just nonprofits in the area that are struggling, and know that they can tap into us and leverage us, and we're going to help share their stories and amplify their voices to be able to make sure that everyone is going to be able to achieve on the other side of this.
Great. So this one is for the panelists. Is there any insight or thinking to the differences of an ally versus that of an accomplice? Susan, would you like to take that on first? Is there any insight or thinking to the differences of an ally versus that of an accomplice?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't know. Does somebody else want to take that on? Is accomplice more nefarious in some way?
That would be my thinking.
Yeah. I think it's I don't know. Sometimes I think that is my role, to be, sort of saying I'm going to fund X and not Y, and in that case I am being an accomplice. Or if I say, in a proposal, what is the makeup of your board? Or in a theater grant, are you, taking enhancement funds? And in those cases, I am being an accomplice. It's a little bit of subterfuge, but I think it's toward an end that justifies the means. But I like to look at positive aspects of accomplishment rather than the negative.
Yeah, definitely.
Come on,
Would
someone else
anybody
help me out.
does anybody I was gonna say, would anybody else like to chime in there?
Well, I don't know. I would guess, I'll give this a shot. I would think that, being an accomplice very often can stem from inaction and, just sort of letting things happen that didn't have to happen. I mean, and it happens all the time in our institutions about all kinds of things, right? I mean, when you have a big institution, I think that, again, I go back to the intentionality and the idea that, I mean, I can tell you, like, for example, whenever there's a search at whatever level for an employee, at whatever level in the institution, we make sure as leadership to go and make sure that, the right approaches are being taken to, recruit applicant pools and all of those things. And I think, it's very easy sometimes to just let things happen. And inertia has its own way of, I think it's one of the reasons we've been talking about this so long, yet, we haven't seen the kind of change fast enough that I think the community expects, and so I think sometimes being an accomplice can be, maybe nefarious isn't quite, maybe it's a little bit strong of a word, but I understood what you meant by that, Susan. But it can often also stem from just sort of a willingness to let the inertia keep things going the way they are, as opposed to shaking things up. And one thing I know about, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and one thing I've learned about institutions is they don't change unless there's a little bit of this going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything's just smooth as glass, nobody really cares about whether things change or not, because everything's just fine, right? And so sometimes as a leader, you have to be the person that does this a little bit, and creates that tension. And, we were talking about conversations and some of those, how difficult some conversations are. But I think I've learned that if people aren't a little uncomfortable, we're not having the right conversations.
Right.
And it's
exactly. Sometimes shaking things up makes you think outside of the box and start to think about things differently.
Mm-hmm. No, but if you are talking about the people that are intentionally getting in the way to prevent the change from happening, I think that is an internal challenge. And Alan, you have had to face that in very public ways, and so admire you for doing so. But I think it's building that sense of DNA rather than DEI.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Our next question is for the orchestras. How does this drive total equity and inclusion among staff translate to the musicians? Is there a divide? And if so, how do you navigate that? Yeah, you want me to, I can repeat that.
you want me
How
to talk?
how does this drive toward equity and inclusion among staff translate to the musicians? Is there a divide? And if so, how do you navigate that? Alan, you want to take that on first?
I won't describe this as a divide so much. So, you take any group of, 150, 200 people, and you're going to have people with different views. Their views are going to be divergent, but they're also going to be at different places in their own journey to learning and understanding. And I think that's the place where I've learned I've got to have patience, is in the work of bringing everyone into a common understanding. But I would say that the vast majority of our institution are aligned, both in the orchestra and on the staff, around the need to do this work and do it well and make it part of our just our DNA and our ongoing work. And so there are, occasionally, as Susan mentioned, individuals who want to, sort of become obstacles to the work. But I think ultimately you can't worry about that too much. You have to, those are the minority. They're fewer and further between. And the vast majority of the people in our institution do want to see change happen. And I think as a leader, that's another thing that you really kind of you're responsible for, right? Ultimately is culture. It's like the most important thing. And so trying to create an internal culture, and I'm saying this as somebody who's learned a lot about it the hard way. Okay. I'm not even in recent times. So I don't pretend to be an expert about it. But what I have observed is that, it is the thing ultimately that we have to do, that we can't force this work, but we can't sit around and wait for it to happen either.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be very intentional, but we have to meet people where they are and try to bring them along. And that's the thing that I get impatient about sometimes.
Yeah.
And I hope they all forgive me for it.
Doris, what about
I
you?
just add to. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just add to that there's more staff attrition than there is. Sorry, I was going to say there's more staff attrition than there is musician attrition. So it's easier to make those changes at the staff level. They're less visible, and that, as I say, the tenure process can be an obstacle, an unintended obstacle, but an existing one. And that's why I'm so pleased to see the substitute musicians, coming out of the SOPA auditions and getting opportunities, because the average audience member doesn't know whether it's a sub or a permanent member on stage, but will notice the difference when it's more diverse.
Absolutely. Doris, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are aligned, not just with the musicians and the staff, but with our board as well, to our commitment to ideas. I do think, Susan, you touched upon what I wanted to touch upon, is that, the public doesn't necessarily, what they see is what's on the stage. And that is, the turnover is not as vast and quick as it is for the staff. And I don't feel that there really is a divide between the staff and the musicians as we drive towards this equity and inclusion. I just see it's, we're all working towards the same commitment. And we all know that there are different stages and there are different places where we just have to bring some people along. And if that means that we have to repeat things a couple of times, that's fine. Because everyone needs to hear things in different fashions, in different ways, and then be involved and to be able to actually see what is happening slowly, quickly. But if they're a part of it, they're going to be able to see it and actually be able to come along in the process as well.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more. And Susan, there's one specifically for you. As a funder, what do you want other foundations to start doing in terms of being a more equitable community partner in philanthropy?
Oh, great question. I would say most of the funders I work with, and I know a lot of them because I've just finished my tenure on Grant Makers in the Arts board, are far more oriented toward being equitable funders than one might know. The reason that the question may be coming up is that not many of them are funding in music. And I think the bigger challenge is finding institutional partners that see the value in what classical music organizations are doing in the social justice sphere, and making the case of the value to the community. So I don't think it's that one's so much a funder issue as a changing the narrative and changing the narrative through action.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time and attention today. I think if we can point out a few things to move forward from our conversation in our organizations is, one, this has to be a part of our DNA. It has to be ingrained in our organizations. We have to understand that this work is not going to change overnight. It's a slow, long process, and we have to be vigilant as we continue to work in this area. And thirdly, we have to be patient and celebrate the small wins, recognize the small wins, and take those as we continue to pick up the ball and run forward as a part of our success in this area. History tends to repeat itself, but hopefully this will be a positive thing that we repeat in history, that we have made changes in our organizations and we've made changes on our stages. So thanks to everyone that attended our session today. And thanks again to our panelists. I appreciate everything that you've shared with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tammie.
Thanks, Sphinx.
Thanks, Sphinx. Yes, absolutely.